At a luxury hotel in Manhattan, a Russian billionaire arrives with a $500 million deal, but no translator can be found. The hotel manager begins to panic. Just as the contract is about to be canceled, a black cleaning lady steps forward and declares she can speak Russian. The manager humiliates and screams at her, refusing to let a black janitor ruin the company's image. What she could never have imagined is that she just insulted a woman with a Columbia University degree who speaks 6 languages fluently and is about to save the entire company. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The Emerald Crown Hotel gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the hurried footsteps of wealthy guests who never looked down at the staff members serving them. It was 5 in the morning, and while Manhattan still slept outside the towering windows, Jasmine Williams was already 2 hours into her 18-hour workday. At 29, Jasmine Williams was officially listed as a hotel maintenance worker, though her daily reality involved far more than the basic cleaning duties outlined in her job description. She moved through the luxurious lobby like a shadow, her cleaning cartwheels barely making a sound on the polished stone. The hotel guests walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, their conversations flowing freely around her presence. They talked about million-dollar deals, exotic vacations, and business mergers, never imagining that the quiet black woman wiping down tables could understand every word they spoke in Russian, Mandarin, Arabic, French, Spanish, and German. "Williams, what are you doing standing around?" The sharp voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. Victoria Sterling, the hotel's operations manager, who oversaw all daily staff activities, approached with her signature expression of barely contained irritation. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the floor. Jasmine had just cleaned, each step deliberate and intimidating. Jasmine straightened up her grip, tightening on the microfiber cloth in her hand. "I was just finishing the marble surfaces, Miss Sterling. The morning shift guests will be coming down soon." "The morning shift guests," Victoria repeated mockingly, her voice dripping with condescension. "These people pay $1,500 a night for their rooms. They don't want to see you moving around like a snail when they're trying to enjoy their breakfast." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. Her heart rate picked up, that familiar burning sensation creeping up her chest. She had heard variations of this lecture countless times over the past 3 years, each incident carving a deeper wound in her sense of dignity. "Yes, Miss Sterling, I'll work faster. You better. And make sure you stay out of sight when the Blackwood Group arrives at 8. They're considering a $50 million renovation contract, and the last thing we need is them seeing—" Victoria paused, her eyes scanning Jasmine from head to toe with undisguised disdain. "Well, you know what I mean." Jasmine knew exactly what she meant. She had known since her first day at the Emerald Crown, when Victoria had made it clear that certain employees were meant to work behind the scenes, never to interact with the hotel's elite clientele. The unspoken rule was simple. People like Jasmine were there to clean up after others, not to be seen or heard. "I understand, Miss Sterling." Victoria smiled, the kind of cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Good. Oh, and Williams, that cart of yours is making noise. Fix it. We can't have our guests disturbed by squeaky wheels." As Victoria walked away, her heels echoing through the vast lobby, Jasmine felt her hands begin to shake. She pressed her lips together, fighting back the wave of humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Victoria Sterling, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and her Columbia University MBA diploma hanging proudly in her office, had no idea that Jasmine held the same degree from the same prestigious institution. Jasmine knelt down beside her cart, pretending to examine the wheels while she composed herself. The memory flooded back unbidden, as it often did in moments like these. 2 years ago, she'd been sitting in a lecture hall at Columbia discussing international relations theory with professors who praised her analytical mind. She had graduated summa cum laude, her thesis on cross-cultural communication, earning recognition from the dean himself. But life had other plans. The call had come during her job search, when prestigious consulting firms were already expressing interest in her resume. Her mother's voice had been weak on the phone, barely above a whisper. "Jasmine, baby, I need to tell you something. The doctors, they found something. Cancer, stage 3. The treatment would cost everything they had and more. Her mother's insurance was basic, designed for routine care, not for the aggressive treatment protocol the oncologist recommended. Jasmine had calculated the numbers in her head during that devastating phone call. Even with her degree, even with her potential starting salary, it would take months to land the right position, complete the interview process, and receive her first paycheck. Her mother needed treatment immediately, so Jasmine had swallowed her pride and taken the first job that offered same-day hiring and immediate pay. The Emerald Crown Hotel needed cleaning staff, and they weren't particularly interested in her educational background. They wanted someone who could start that very afternoon, someone who wouldn't ask questions or demand high wages. 3 years later, she was still there. "Hey, Jasmine." The gentle voice belonged to Marcus Thompson, the night security supervisor who had become her only genuine ally in the hotel hierarchy. He was the one person at the Emerald Crown who consistently treated her with genuine respect. "You okay? You look upset." Jasmine stood up, wiping her hands on her uniform. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just tired." Marcus was a 55-year-old veteran security supervisor who had worked at various Manhattan hotels for over 20 years, slowly climbing the ranks through dedication and competence. He understood the unspoken dynamics of their workplace better than most. His eyes reflected the same weary knowledge that Jasmine carried, the understanding of what it meant to be simultaneously essential and invisible. "Sterling giving you trouble again? It's nothing I can't handle." "You know," Marcus said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I've been watching you work for 3 years. You're different from the others. Smarter. I don't know what your story is, but I can tell you're not supposed to be here." The observation hit closer to home than Jasmine expected. She felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying at work was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not where Victoria Sterling might see. "We all have our stories, Marcus. That we do. But some stories aren't finished being written yet." Before Jasmine could respond, the elevator chimed, and Victoria Sterling emerged with hotel manager Richard Blackwood, the man who ultimately controlled the fate of everyone working in the building. They were deep in conversation, their voices carrying across the marble expanse. "The Russian delegation arrives at 10. Blackwood was saying, his tone urgent. "Dmitry Volkov doesn't travel for small deals, Victoria. If we impress him, we're looking at long-term contracts worth millions." "Everything will be perfect, Richard. I've personally overseen every detail." As they passed, Victoria's eyes found Jasmine and Marcus. Her expression hardened immediately. "Williams, I thought I told you to stay out of sight." "And, Thompson, shouldn't you be checking the perimeter?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied evenly, but Jasmine caught the flash of anger in his eyes. "I was just making sure everything was secure in the lobby." After they left, Marcus shook his head. "That woman has no idea what respect means." Jasmine resumed her cleaning, but her mind was elsewhere. She had heard Dmitry Volkov's name before, during her international relations studies. He was more than just a wealthy businessman. He was a key figure in Eastern European energy markets, a man whose decisions could influence entire economies. The fact that he was coming to the Emerald Crown meant this was no ordinary business meeting. As she worked, Jasmine found herself thinking about the cruel paradox of her situation. She possessed knowledge that could be invaluable in high-level international negotiations, but she was considered unsuitable to even be seen by the people who needed that knowledge most. Victoria Sterling, with all her authority and condescension, probably couldn't even locate Ukraine on a map, let alone navigate the complex cultural nuances of doing business with Eastern European oligarchs. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of quiet humiliation. Jasmine cleaned the same surfaces multiple times, not because they were dirty, but because staying busy was the only way to avoid Victoria's criticism. She reorganized supply closets that were already organized, polished brass fixtures that already gleamed, and tried to make herself as small and unnoticed as possible. But invisibility came with a price. Every day she felt a little more of herself disappearing. The confident, articulate woman who had once commanded respect in academic settings was slowly being erased, replaced by someone who apologized for existing and measured her worth by her ability to clean without being noticed. Around 9:30, unusual activity began stirring in the lobby. Additional hotel security personnel took their positions, and Blackwood appeared with a team of assistant managers, all looking nervously at their watches and phones. The energy in the air was electric with anticipation and barely controlled anxiety. Jasmine continued her work, but she couldn't help noticing the preparations. Extra security cameras were being checked, Flowers were being rearranged for the third time, and Victoria Sterling was practically vibrating with nervous energy as she barked orders at everyone within earshot. "This has to be perfect," Victoria was saying to anyone who would listen. "Dmitry Volkov doesn't give second chances. If anything goes wrong, if there's even the smallest mistake." She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. Jobs were on the line. Careers could be made or destroyed based on the next few hours. As Jasmine watched the controlled chaos unfold around her, she felt that familiar ache in her chest. She wanted to help, wanted to contribute something meaningful, but she knew her place in this world. She was the invisible woman who cleaned up after others, not someone whose opinion mattered or whose expertise was valued. She had no idea that in less than an hour everything would change. The careful balance of power that kept her invisible and voiceless was about to shift in ways that no one, especially Victoria Sterling, could have imagined. But for now, Jasmine Williams remained what she had always been in this place, a shadow moving silently through a world that refused to see her carrying secrets and talents that seemed destined to remain forever hidden behind the simple uniform of a hotel cleaning lady. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, the revolving doors of the Emerald Crown Hotel began spinning with an intensity that commanded attention. The first figure to emerge was a man in an expensive charcoal suit, his eyes scanning the lobby with the calculated precision of someone trained to identify threats. He was followed by another, then another, until 20 security personnel had positioned themselves strategically throughout the marble expanse. Jasmine paused in her cleaning routine, her cloth frozen mid-wipe on a brass handrail. She had seen wealthy guests arrive before, but nothing like this. The air itself seemed to change, becoming charged with an energy that made everyone in the lobby move a little faster, speak a little quieter. Then he walked in. Dmitry Volkov was not particularly tall, but his presence filled the room in a way that made height irrelevant. At 52, the Russian energy tycoon moved with the quiet confidence of someone who owned countries, not just companies. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his dark eyes missed nothing, and when he spoke in rapid Russian to his personal assistant, every hotel employee within earshot tried to look busy. "Welcome to the Emerald Crown, Mr. Volkov." Richard Blackwood stepped forward with the kind of smile reserved for guests whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. As the hotel manager, he had hosted celebrities, politicians, and billionaires, but Dmitry Volkov represented something beyond ordinary wealth. He was a man whose decisions could shift global energy markets. Volkov nodded politely, but said nothing in English. Instead, he continued speaking Russian to his assistant, a thin man in his 30s, who frantically typed notes on his phone while trying to keep up with his boss's rapid instructions. Victoria Sterling appeared at Blackwood's side, her usual arrogance replaced by nervous energy. As operations manager, she had spent weeks preparing for this visit, and the tension was written across her perfectly made-up face. "Everything is prepared exactly as requested," Victoria said, her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone trying too hard to sound confident. "The presidential suite has been secured, and our translator will be here momentarily to assist with the negotiations." The assistant looked up from his phone and spoke in accented English. "Mr. Volkov asks about security protocols and privacy guarantees. This meeting involves sensitive energy contracts with American partners. No recording devices, no interruptions." "Of course," Blackwood replied immediately. "We understand the delicate nature of international business. Where is our translator? She should have been here by now." Victoria's phone buzzed. Her face went white as she read the message, and Jasmine watched from across the lobby as the operations manager's confident facade crumbled in real time. "Richard," Victoria whispered urgently, pulling the hotel manager aside. "Sarah Mitchell was in a car accident on the FDR Drive. She's in the hospital." "What?" Blackwood's voice cracked slightly. Sarah Mitchell was their primary Russian translator, a woman they had specifically hired for high-level international guests. "Well, call the backup. We have contingency plans for exactly this situation." Victoria's hands were shaking now as she scrolled through her contacts. "I'm trying both backups. James Crawford tested positive for COVID this morning and is quarantined. And Maria Petrov." She paused, her voice dropping to an almost whisper. "Maria Petrov declined. She said she doesn't feel comfortable working with certain types of Russian businessmen." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maria had done her research on Dmitry Volkov and decided the potential risks outweighed any payment the hotel could offer. Jasmine continued polishing the same section of handrail, but her attention was completely focused on the unfolding crisis. She understood every word of the rapid Russian conversation happening 15 feet away, where Volkov was expressing growing impatience to his assistant. "Tell them we have limited time," Volkov was saying in Russian, his tone sharp with irritation. "If they cannot provide proper translation services, we will take our business elsewhere. The Carlyle Group expects this contract to be finalized today." The assistant translated a sanitized version. "Mr. Volkov reminds you that he has other appointments scheduled. The business meetings need to begin soon." But Jasmine heard the real message. This wasn't just about scheduling, it was about respect. Volkov was testing the hotel's competence, and they were failing spectacularly. Victoria was now making increasingly desperate phone calls, her voice rising with each rejected request. "What do you mean you can't be here in an hour? This is the Emerald Crown Hotel." "Yes, I understand it's short notice, but—" Blackwood paced behind her, his usual composure cracking under pressure. As hotel manager, his reputation depended on seamless service, especially for guests of Volkov's caliber. Sweat was beginning to form on his forehead, despite the lobby's perfect climate control. "How long until someone can get here?" he hissed at Victoria. "The earliest anyone can arrive is 3 o'clock, maybe 4. 4 o'clock. Blackwood's voice pitched higher than intended. "The Russian delegation has meetings with the Carlyle Group at 2. If we delay this, we lose everything." Jasmine knew exactly what everything meant. She had overheard enough conversations over the past 3 years to understand the hotel's financial situation. The Emerald Crown was prestigious, but struggling. The renovation contract Victoria had mentioned earlier wasn't just business, it was survival. Losing Volkov's account would mean layoffs, budget cuts, and possibly the end of the hotel's reputation in international business circles. The crisis was deepening by the minute. Volkov's assistant approached Blackwood with barely concealed frustration. "Mr. Volkov is considering alternative arrangements," the assistant said, his diplomatic language failing to mask the threat. "Perhaps the Four Seasons or the St. Regis would be better equipped to handle sensitive international negotiations." Those words hit the hotel management like a physical blow. The Four Seasons and St. Regis were their primary competitors, and losing a client of Volkov's stature to either establishment would be a humiliation that would echo through the industry for years. "Please." Victoria stepped forward, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine panic. "Give us just a few more minutes. We're resolving this situation." But they weren't resolving anything. Jasmine watched as Victoria made call after call, each conversation ending in the same result: no available translators who were both qualified and willing to work with Dmitry Volkov on such short notice. The Russian businessman was now speaking more rapidly to his assistant, his body language shifting from impatience to active irritation. His security team remained professionally neutral, but Jasmine could see them subtly repositioning themselves, preparing for a potential departure. "He's getting ready to leave," she thought to herself, understanding the cultural cues that the hotel staff was missing entirely. In Russian business culture, competence was everything. The inability to provide a basic service like translation wasn't just inconvenient, it was insulting. Marcus Thompson appeared at her side, his security supervisor instincts picking up on the tension. "This doesn't look good," he murmured quietly. "Whatever's happening, management is about to lose their minds." Jasmine nodded, continuing her cleaning while keeping her ears tuned to every word. She heard Volkov tell his assistant in Russian, "These Americans promise efficiency but deliver chaos. Perhaps we should reconsider our investment in their market entirely." The assistant was preparing to deliver another diplomatically phrased ultimatum when Victoria's phone rang again. She answered with desperate hope, only to have her face fall within seconds. "That was our last option," she told Blackwood, her voice barely above a whisper. "The translation agency says they have nobody available who specializes in business Russian and has the security clearance for this level of negotiation." Blackwood stared at her as if she had just announced the end of the world. In many ways, she had. The hotel's future was walking toward the door, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "What about emergency translation services?" he asked desperately. "I tried. They're all booked or unqualified. Richard, we're looking at a complete disaster here." Jasmine felt her heart rate increase as she watched the situation deteriorate. She could solve this problem in 30 seconds, but the very suggestion would be absurd. She was a maintenance worker invisible by design, whose opinion had never been sought on anything more complex than which cleaning products to use. Volkov's assistant was now approaching with what was clearly a final message. His expression was apologetic but firm. Mr. Volkov appreciates the Emerald Crown's hospitality, but he cannot conduct business without proper translation services. He will be relocating to the St. Regis Hotel, where arrangements have already been confirmed. The words hit like a death sentence. Victoria Sterling's face went completely pale, and Blackwood looked as though he might be sick. 3 years of relationship building, weeks of preparation, and millions of dollars in potential contracts were walking out the door. "Please," Victoria said, her voice cracking with desperation, "just give us 15 more minutes. I'm sure we can find someone." But even as she spoke, Volkov's security team was already moving toward the door. The Russian businessman had made his decision, and men at his level rarely reversed course once their patience had been exhausted. Jasmine gripped her cleaning cloth tighter, watching helplessly as the most important business opportunity in the Emerald Crown's recent history prepared to disappear forever. She possessed exactly the skills they needed, but she might as well have been invisible. In their world, people like her didn't have solutions to problems like this. The assistant was already on his phone, presumably confirming arrangements at the St. Regis, when Victoria Sterling made her final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mr. Volkov, please. We can arrange a video conference with a translator, or perhaps we could reschedule for later today, when someone becomes available." Volkov paused at her suggestion, and for a moment, hope flickered in both Victoria's and Blackwood's eyes. Then he spoke in Russian, his tone final and dismissive. Jasmine understood every word. "Tell them that professionals don't make excuses. They provide solutions. Since they have no solutions, we have no business here." The assistant translated a gentler version. "Mr. Volkov thanks you for your time, but he must proceed with his schedule." As the Russian delegation moved toward the door, Jasmine felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't experienced in 3 years of invisible servitude. It wasn't just frustration or sympathy. It was a growing determination that surprised her with its intensity. She watched Victoria Sterling's career crumbling in real time, watched Richard Blackwood facing the worst professional crisis of his life, and realized that she held the power to change everything. The question was whether she had the courage to make herself visible in a world that had spent 3 years teaching her to disappear. The moment Jasmine took a single step closer to the unfolding crisis, Victoria Sterling's radar locked onto her like a heat-seeking missile. The operations manager's face, already flushed with panic and desperation, twisted into something far uglier when she spotted the maintenance worker moving within earshot of their VIP guest. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victoria's voice cut through the marble lobby like a whip crack, loud enough to make several guests turn their heads. The professional composure she had been desperately maintaining for Dmitry Volkov's benefit evaporated completely. Jasmine froze, her cleaning cloth still in her hand, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She had only moved 3 steps closer, drawn by an instinct to help that she couldn't quite suppress. But in Victoria's eyes, those 3 steps represented a capital offense. "I was just cleaning the area near the—" "You were eavesdropping on a private business conversation," Victoria snapped, striding toward Jasmine with the kind of aggressive energy that made everyone in the lobby uncomfortable. "Do you have any idea how inappropriate that is?" The accusation hit Jasmine like a physical slap. She felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as conversations around the lobby began to quiet guests and staff alike, turning to witness what was clearly about to become a public spectacle. "Miss Sterling, I wasn't eavesdropping. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Victoria's voice rose another octave, her composure completely shattered by the stress of the failing negotiation and the convenient target that Jasmine represented. "Your job is to clean toilets and empty trash cans. Your job is to stay invisible and out of the way when important people are conducting business." Dmitry Volkov had paused near the elevator, his assistant at his side, both men watching the confrontation with expressions of growing disapproval. They couldn't understand the English words, but the body language was universally clear. This was a person in power, abusing someone with none. Jasmine felt the familiar burning sensation rising in her chest. The same feeling she had experienced countless times over the past 3 years when her dignity was stripped away piece by piece. But this time, something was different. This time, the stakes weren't just her personal humiliation. There was a solution to a real problem being ignored because of who she was. "Miss Sterling, please. I understand you're under stress, but—" "Don't you dare tell me about stress," Victoria exploded, taking another step closer until she was invading Jasmine's personal space. "You have no idea what real responsibility feels like. You push a mop around and collect a paycheck. That's the extent of your contribution to this establishment." The words were designed to wound, and they found their target. Jasmine felt her hands begin to tremble, not from fear, but from the sheer force of trying to contain her response. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to reveal the truth about her qualifications, to put this woman in her place with facts and credentials that would leave Victoria Sterling speechless. But she had learned over 3 years that fighting back only made things worse for people in her position. Richard Blackwood appeared at Victoria's shoulder, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. The hotel manager was watching his career implode in real time, and his usual diplomatic nature was being overwhelmed by desperation. "Victoria, perhaps we should focus on the situation at hand," he said quietly, glancing nervously at Volkov, who was now speaking in rapid Russian to his assistant. "I am handling the situation," Victoria snapped back, her voice carrying across the lobby for everyone to hear. "Part of handling VIP guests properly is making sure the help knows their place." The word help landed like a physical blow. Jasmine felt something crack inside her chest, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of accumulated disrespect. She looked around the lobby and saw the faces of the other staff members, some sympathetic, others carefully neutral, all of them relieved that they weren't the target of Victoria's meltdown. Marcus Thompson had appeared at the edge of the scene, his security supervisor instincts telling him that the situation was escalating beyond professional boundaries. But even he was powerless to intervene directly without risking his own position. "You know what your problem is," Victoria continued, her voice now loud enough that even Dmitry Volkov's security team was paying attention. "You people always think you're entitled to be involved in things that are way above your pay grade. You think because you work in the same building as successful people, that somehow makes you qualified to have opinions about their business." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone in the lobby understood exactly what Victoria meant, and the implication sent a chill through the assembled crowd. Several guests looked genuinely uncomfortable, while others seemed to be enjoying the free entertainment. Jasmine felt her vision blur slightly, not from tears, but from the sheer force of rage that was building behind her careful mask of professional submission. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. "Baby, sometimes you have to bite your tongue to survive, but never let them make you believe their lies about who you are." "I apologize if I've caused any confusion," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'll return to my duties." But Victoria wasn't finished. The stress of the failed negotiation, the presence of the Russian delegation, and the audience of onlookers had created a perfect storm of cruelty that demanded a complete humiliation. "Oh, you'll return to your duties all right," Victoria said, her voice dripping with malicious satisfaction. "But first, let me make something crystal clear to everyone watching." She gestured broadly at the assembled crowd as if she were giving a presentation. "This person," she pointed directly at Jasmine, "represents everything that's wrong with modern service standards. No respect for hierarchy, no understanding of boundaries, and certainly no appreciation for the fact that some conversations are meant for people with actual education and experience." The attack was so vicious, so publicly degrading, that several guests actually looked away in embarrassment. But Victoria was beyond caring about public opinion. She was a drowning woman, lashing out at the nearest target. "You want to know what your contribution to this crisis has been?" Victoria continued, her voice reaching a crescendo of cruelty. "You've been a distraction. While I'm trying to solve a complex international business problem, I have to waste time managing cleaning staff who don't know their place." Jasmine felt something fundamental shift inside her. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a kind of crystalline clarity that cut through years of accumulated submission and self-doubt. She looked at Victoria Sterling, red-faced and trembling with misplaced rage, and realized that this woman was about to lose everything because she was too proud and too prejudiced to accept help from someone she considered beneath her. Dmitry Volkov was now speaking urgently to his assistant, his patience finally exhausted. Jasmine understood every word. This is exactly the kind of disrespectful workplace culture that makes me question doing business with American companies. They treat their own employees like garbage. How can we trust them to treat us with dignity? The assistant was nodding, already making notes for their departure. The entire Russian delegation was preparing to leave, taking with them not just the immediate contract, but any future possibility of business relationships. You know what the real tragedy is here. Victoria's voice had taken on a tone of fake sympathy that was somehow worse than her open hostility. You actually think you could have helped with this situation. You think because you've overheard a few conversations while emptying trash cans, you understand international business. She laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. Let me explain something to you about the real world. Important people like Mr. Volkov don't waste their time talking to the cleaning lady. They need professionals, people with degrees and credentials and actual experience. They need someone who belongs in their world, not someone who... Victoria paused, her eyes scanning Jasmine from her simple uniform to her worn work shoes. Not someone who looks like they just stepped off the street. The final insult landed with devastating precision. It wasn't just about Jasmine's job, or her education, or her qualifications. It was about her race, her appearance, her fundamental right to be seen as a human being worthy of basic respect. The lobby fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning system. Even the Russian delegation had stopped their private conversation, sensing that something significant was happening. Jasmine felt her hands unclench from the cleaning cloth she had been gripping. Her heart rate, which had been hammering with stress and humiliation, suddenly slowed to a steady, determined rhythm. The familiar burning in her chest transformed into something else entirely, a cold, clear resolve that she hadn't felt since her Columbia graduation day. She looked at Victoria Sterling, then at Richard Blackwood, then at the Russian delegation preparing to walk out of their lives forever. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about the 3 years of invisible servitude, about the talents and knowledge that had been systematically ignored and dismissed. And then Jasmine Williams made a decision that would change everything. "Miss Sterling," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made everyone in the lobby turn toward her. "Before you finish destroying this negotiation completely, there's something you should know." Victoria's eyes widened in shock. In 3 years, Jasmine had never directly challenged her authority, never spoken back, never done anything but accept whatever abuse was directed her way. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice was dangerous now, her authority directly threatened in front of the most important guest the hotel had ever hosted. Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 3 years of silence lifting from her shoulders. "I said, there's something you should know. About the solution to your problem. About why Mr. Volkov is about to walk out that door and never come back." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the Emerald Crown lobby understood that whatever happened next would change the balance of power in ways that no one could have predicted. The silence that followed Jasmine's challenge was so profound that it seemed to absorb sound itself. Victoria Sterling's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions, shock, rage, disbelief, and something approaching panic, as she realized that her authority was being questioned in front of the most important guest in the hotel's history. "How dare you!" Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the venom of someone whose entire worldview was being threatened. "How dare you speak to me that way in front of our guests?" But Jasmine was no longer the invisible maintenance worker who had spent 3 years accepting abuse in silence. Something fundamental had shifted inside her, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an authority that no one in the Emerald Crown lobby had ever heard from her before. "Miss Sterling, with all due respect, you've just spent the last 10 minutes publicly humiliating me in front of everyone here," Jasmine said, her tone calm but unwavering. "You've made assumptions about my intelligence, my education, and my qualifications based on nothing more than the color of my skin and the uniform I wear." The words landed like physical blows. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, finally understanding the true nature of what they had been witnessing. This wasn't just a workplace dispute, it was something far more serious and morally complex. Victoria's face flushed even deeper. "You are completely out of line. Richard calls security. Have this person removed from the premises immediately." But Richard Blackwood was staring at Jasmine with a puzzled expression, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time in 3 years. Something about her demeanor, her vocabulary, the way she carried herself, it didn't match the profile of the woman he thought he knew. Before anyone calls security, Jasmine continued, her eyes moving from Victoria to Blackwood to the Russian delegation. Perhaps someone should ask Mr. Volkov what he's been saying for the past 15 minutes. The suggestion hung in the air like a live wire. Dmitry Volkov's eyebrows rose slightly, and he exchanged a meaningful glance with his assistant. No one at the Emerald Crown was supposed to understand Russian. That had been one of the primary security requirements for this meeting. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Oh, this is rich. Now the cleaning lady thinks she speaks Russian. What's next? Are you going to tell us you have a degree in international relations?" The sarcastic question was meant to be the final humiliation, the ultimate proof of Jasmine's delusions of grandeur. Instead, it became the moment that changed everything. "Actually," Jasmine said quietly, "I do." The words fell into the lobby like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of the space. Victoria's mocking smile froze on her face, and Richard Blackwood's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching shock. "I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia University with a degree in international relations and a specialization in Eastern European studies." Jasmine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I speak 6 languages fluently, including Russian, which I studied for 4 years and practiced extensively during my volunteer work with refugee assistance programs." The transformation in the lobby's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Guests who had been watching the confrontation with casual interest now leaned forward, riveted by this unexpected revelation. Hotel staff members stared in open amazement, and even Dmitry Volkov's security team seemed more attentive. Victoria Sterling looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, her brain struggling to process information that contradicted everything she had believed for 3 years. "That's impossible," she finally managed to stammer. "You're a cleaning lady. You can't have... There's no way you could..." "Miss Sterling," Jasmine interrupted gently, "would you like me to demonstrate?" Without waiting for permission, Jasmine turned toward Dmitry Volkov and spoke in fluent Russian, her pronunciation perfect and her grammar impeccable. "Mr. Volkov, I deeply apologize for the unprofessional behavior you have witnessed here today. I understand that you have been expressing concerns about American business culture and the treatment of employees in our hospitality industry." The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. Dmitry Volkov's face lit up with genuine surprise and what appeared to be delight. He responded immediately in rapid Russian, his voice animated with interest. "Incredible! Where did you learn to speak Russian so beautifully? Your accent is nearly perfect. I can hear traces of Moscow pronunciation with some St. Petersburg influences." The conversation continued in Russian, while everyone else in the lobby stood frozen in various states of shock and disbelief. Victoria Sterling's face had gone completely white, and she was gripping the marble counter so tightly that her knuckles were turning the same color. "I studied at Columbia University and spent a summer in Russia as part of an exchange program," Jasmine replied in Russian, her confidence growing with every word. "I also worked extensively with Russian immigrants in community assistance programs here in New York." Dmitry Volkov nodded approvingly, then said something that made his assistant smile and take out his phone to stop recording their departure arrangements. "You have impressed me greatly," Volkov continued in Russian. "Tell me, what do you know about energy sector negotiations between Russia and the United States?" The question was clearly a test, and everyone in the lobby could sense its importance, even if they couldn't understand the words. Jasmine paused for just a moment, then launched into a sophisticated analysis of current geopolitical tensions, regulatory frameworks, and market dynamics that demonstrated not just language skills, but genuine expertise in international business. As she spoke, the expressions on the faces around her continued to evolve. Marcus Thompson was grinning with undisguised pride and amazement. Several guests were whispering to each other with obvious admiration. Hotel staff members were staring at Jasmine as if they had never seen her before, which in many ways they hadn't. But the most dramatic transformation was occurring in Victoria Sterling's face. The operations manager looked like she was watching her entire reality crumble in real time. The woman she had dismissed as ignorant, unqualified, and beneath notice was conducting a sophisticated business conversation in fluent Russian with one of the world's most powerful energy executives. When Jasmine finished her analysis, Dmitry Volkov turned to his assistant and spoke in English for the first time since entering the hotel. "Cancel our arrangements at the St. Regis," he said, his accent thick, but his words clear. "We will conduct our business here, after all." The assistant nodded and immediately began making phone calls, his relief evident as he undid the logistical arrangements for their departure. Volkov then turned back to the assembled group, his eyes moving from Richard Blackwood to Victoria Sterling before settling on Jasmine. "In 30 years of international business," he said in careful English, "I have learned that the true measure of any organization is not the competence of its leadership, but how it treats its most valuable employees." His gaze shifted to Victoria, and his expression hardened noticeably. "For the past 20 minutes, I have watched your operations manager publicly humiliate the most qualified person in this lobby. She has made assumptions based on prejudice rather than ability, and she has demonstrated exactly the kind of small-minded thinking that destroys business relationships." Victoria's face was now cycling through shades of red and white as the full implications of the situation began to dawn on her. Not only had she been completely wrong about Jasmine's qualifications, but she had displayed her ignorance and prejudice in front of a guest whose opinion could make or break careers. Furthermore, Volkov continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This young lady has demonstrated in 5 minutes what your professional translation services could not accomplish in 2 hours. She has the cultural knowledge, language skills, and business acumen to facilitate complex international negotiations." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "I will conduct my business with the Emerald Crown Hotel, but I will only work with Miss—" He paused, realizing he didn't know Jasmine's name. "Williams," Jasmine supplied quietly. "Jasmine Williams. I will only work with Miss Williams as my translator and cultural liaison," Volkov finished. "She appears to be the only person here who understands both the technical aspects of international business and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect." The lobby fell into another stunned silence as the full magnitude of the role reversal became clear. The woman who had been dismissed as unqualified cleaning staff was now being personally requested by a billionaire client. The operations manager who had claimed superior education and experience was being essentially dismissed as inadequate for the task. Richard Blackwood, still struggling to process the dramatic shift in circumstances, finally found his voice. "Miss Williams," he said, his tone completely different from any he had ever used with her before. "Would you be willing to assist with Mr. Volkov's business arrangements?" All eyes turned to Jasmine, waiting for her response. She looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of people who had ignored her existence for 3 years, who had treated her as invisible and insignificant. She saw Victoria Sterling's expression of mounting horror as the operations manager began to understand the professional consequences of her behavior. And then Jasmine Williams, who had spent 3 years being told she didn't belong in the world of important people, smiled with quiet confidence and gave the answer that would change everything. "I would be honored to help," she said simply, but the most dramatic revelations were still to come. 30 minutes later, the Emerald Crown's presidential suite had been transformed into an international negotiation center. The room buzzed with an energy that was both professional and historic. Contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars were about to be discussed, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jasmine sat at the polished mahogany conference table, a position she could never have imagined occupying just hours earlier. To her right sat Dmitry Volkov, the Russian energy magnate, whose empire spanned 3 continents. Across from them were representatives from the Carlyle Group, America's second-largest energy conglomerate, who had arrived expecting routine translation services and instead found themselves working with someone whose expertise exceeded their expectations. Richard Blackwood stood at the edge of the room, his role reduced to that of an observer in his own hotel. The hotel manager's expression was a mixture of amazement and barely concealed anxiety as he watched his former cleaning lady conduct business at a level that most Harvard MBAs would find challenging. Victoria Sterling was notably absent. After Dmitry Volkov's public endorsement of Jasmine and implicit criticism of the operations manager's behavior, Victoria had retreated to her office, ostensibly to handle other urgent matters. In reality, everyone knew she was hiding from the professional humiliation that was reverberating throughout the hotel. "Miss Williams," said James Patterson, the lead negotiator for the Carlyle Group, "before we begin, I have to say that your preliminary analysis of the regulatory framework, was remarkably thorough. Where did you develop such detailed knowledge of energy sector compliance? Jasmine smiled modestly, still adjusting to being treated as an expert rather than invisible help. During my studies at Columbia, I wrote my senior thesis on the intersection of energy policy and international relations. I focused specifically on how regulatory differences between countries can either facilitate or complicate cross-border energy partnerships. Patterson exchanged impressed glances with his colleagues. They had arrived expecting to work with a basic interpreter and instead found themselves collaborating with someone who understood their business at a sophisticated level. Dmitry Volkov leaned forward, his eyes sharp with interest. Miss Williams, please explain to our American partners what I told you earlier about the specific challenges we face with current pipeline regulations. What followed was a masterclass in international business communication. Jasmine didn't simply translate Volkov's words, she contextualized them, explaining not just what he was saying, but why he was saying it, what cultural and business factors were driving his position, and how American negotiators could best respond to address his concerns. Mr. Volkov is emphasizing that Russian energy companies have been burned by previous partnerships where regulatory changes occurred mid-contract. Jasmine explained to the Carlyle team. He's not necessarily opposed to the current terms, but he needs stronger guarantees about regulatory stability over the life of the agreement. She then turned to Volkov and continued in Russian. The American team understands your concerns about regulatory risk. They're prepared to discuss insurance mechanisms and political risk guarantees that could protect both parties if policies change unexpectedly. The conversation flowed with a sophistication that amazed everyone in the room. Jasmine wasn't just facilitating communication, she was actively contributing insights that helped both sides understand each other's positions and find common ground. This is remarkable, Patterson murmured to his colleague during a brief break. She's not just translating language, she's translating entire business cultures. I've never seen anything like it. As the negotiation progressed, it became clear that Jasmine's presence was transforming what could have been a difficult and protracted discussion into something approaching a collaborative, problem-solving session. Her ability to anticipate cultural misunderstandings and address them before they became obstacles was saving both sides significant time and frustration. Mr. Volkov, she said, during a particularly complex discussion about environmental compliance, I think it would be helpful if you explain to the Carlyle team why Russian environmental standards are actually more stringent than they might expect. And, gentlemen, she turned to the Americans, it would be valuable for Mr. Volkov to understand how your company's environmental initiatives go beyond mere regulatory compliance. The suggestion led to a productive exchange that revealed both sides were more aligned on environmental issues than they had initially realized. What had started as a potential point of conflict became a foundation for stronger partnership. Marcus Thompson appeared quietly at the edge of the room, having been asked by Blackwood to ensure the meeting's security and privacy. But he couldn't help watching Jasmine with undisguised pride and amazement. The woman he had known as a hard-working but underappreciated cleaning lady was now orchestrating negotiations that would be talked about in boardrooms across 2 continents. The preliminary numbers we're discussing, Patterson said, reviewing his notes, are significantly higher than our original projections. Miss Williams, your insights about long-term market trends have convinced us that we should be thinking about this partnership on a much larger scale. Dmitry Volkov nodded approvingly. Miss Williams understands something that many American businesses miss. Russian partnerships are not transactions, they are relationships. When we find the right partners, we think in terms of decades, not quarters. The room fell quiet as the implication sank in. What had started as a $500 million contract was evolving into something much more significant, a long-term strategic alliance that could be worth billions over time. If I may, Jasmine interjected carefully, there's an opportunity here that neither side has fully explored. Mr. Volkov, your company has expertise in cold weather energy extraction that could be valuable for American operations in Alaska. And the Carlyle Group has renewable energy integration technologies that could help Russian operations meet emerging European environmental standards. The suggestion was met with thoughtful silence as both sides processed the implications. Jasmine had identified synergies that neither negotiating team had considered, opening possibilities for collaboration that extended far beyond the original contract scope. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need, Patterson said, his excitement barely contained. Miss Williams, have you considered a career in international business consulting? The question hung in the air like an invitation to an entirely different life. Jasmine felt her heart rate increase as she processed what was happening. These weren't just polite compliments, they were genuine expressions of professional respect from people who operated at the highest levels of global business. I appreciate the suggestion, she replied diplomatically, but right now I'm focused on helping facilitate this partnership. Dmitry Volkov studied her for a moment, then spoke in Russian. Miss Williams, I have a question that may be personal, but I'm curious. With your obvious qualifications and abilities, how did you end up working as cleaning staff at this hotel? The question was asked gently, but everyone in the room could sense its importance. Even the Americans who couldn't understand the Russian words recognized that something significant was being discussed. Jasmine paused, considering how much of her personal story to share in this professional setting. When she answered, her voice carried a quiet dignity that resonated with everyone present. Sometimes life requires us to make sacrifices for the people we love, she replied in Russian. My mother needed medical treatment that we couldn't afford. I took the first job that offered immediate income and health insurance. I never expected it to last 3 years, but sometimes survival requires patience. Her words were simple, but they carried an emotional weight that transformed the atmosphere in the room. Here was someone who had sacrificed her career ambitions for family obligations, who had endured years of professional invisibility while maintaining her skills and dignity. Dmitry Volkov's expression softened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried genuine respect. Miss Williams, I want to make you an offer. My company is expanding our American operations, and we need someone who understands both cultures and possesses your level of expertise. Would you consider joining Volkov Industries as our Director of Cultural Relations and Strategic Communications? The position would be based in New York with a starting salary of $250,000 annually plus comprehensive benefits. The offer hit the room like a thunderbolt. Everyone present understood that they had just witnessed a life-changing moment, not just for Jasmine, but potentially for the entire trajectory of Russian-American energy cooperation. James Patterson leaned forward, his competitive instincts activated. Miss Williams, before you answer that, I should mention that the Carlyle Group would also be very interested in discussing a position with our international development team. Suddenly, the woman who had been invisible for 3 years found herself the center of a bidding war between two of the world's most powerful energy companies. The transformation was so complete, so dramatic, that it seemed almost surreal. Richard Blackwood, watching from the corner of the room, felt his stomach sink as he realized the hotel was about to lose the most talented employee they had never recognized they possessed. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As Jasmine prepared to respond to the competing offers, Dmitry Volkov's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression changed as he read it, and when he looked up, his eyes held a new intensity. Miss Williams, he said quietly, there's something else we need to discuss. Something that will change everything we've talked about today. The room fell silent, waiting for whatever bombshell was about to drop into an already extraordinary day. Dmitry Volkov set his phone down on the mahogany table with deliberate precision, his expression shifting from satisfied businessman to something far more calculating. The energy in the presidential suite changed immediately, as if everyone present could sense that whatever was coming would be more significant than the remarkable negotiations they had just witnessed. Miss Williams, Volkov said, his voice carrying a new weight of authority. Before we finalize any employment discussions, I believe it's time for complete honesty about today's events. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken, uncertainty creeping into what had been the most triumphant moment of her professional life. I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Volkov. The Russian billionaire leaned back in his chair, his eyes moving from Jasmine to James Patterson to Richard Blackwood, who was still hovering nervously at the edge of the room. The message I just received was from my head of security. Volkov continued, his accent making each word sound more ominous. He has completed his investigation into the events that occurred in your lobby this morning. Investigation. The word sent a chill through the room. James Patterson and his Carlyle Group colleagues exchanged puzzled glances while Richard Blackwood's face began to drain of color. You see, Volkov continued, when I travel for business, especially for negotiations of this magnitude, my security team conducts comprehensive surveillance of the environments where I'll be operating. This includes reviewing security camera footage, analyzing staff behavior patterns, and identifying potential risks to both personal safety and business confidentiality. He paused, letting the implications sink in. What they discovered about the Emerald Crown Hotel's management practices was quite illuminating. Jasmine felt her stomach drop. Whatever was coming, she sensed it would fundamentally change everything that had just happened. My security team has footage from the past 6 months of interactions between hotel management and staff, Volkov said, his tone becoming colder with each word. The pattern of behavior towards certain employees, particularly employees of color, is not only morally reprehensible, but represents exactly the kind of toxic workplace culture that makes me question whether to do business with American companies at all. Richard Blackwood's face had gone completely white. As hotel manager, he was ultimately responsible for the culture and behavior of his staff, and he was beginning to understand that his career was hanging by a thread. Furthermore, Volkov continued relentlessly, my team observed the treatment of Miss Williams specifically. For 3 years, this hotel has employed someone with Columbia University credentials and expertise in international relations, and not only failed to utilize her talents, but actively suppressed them through systematic humiliation and racist treatment. The words landed like physical blows. Even James Patterson and his colleagues, who had no direct involvement in the hotel's internal operations, looked uncomfortable as they realized they were witnessing a moral reckoning of extraordinary proportions. But here's what I find most interesting, Volkov said, his eyes focusing laser-like on Jasmine. My investigation revealed that you didn't just accidentally end up in that lobby this morning. You've been observing our security preparations, listening to our conversations, and positioning yourself to intervene for the past week. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had indeed been paying attention to the preparations for Volkov's visit, not out of any calculated plan, but from genuine interest in the international business being conducted around her. But she realized how her behavior might have appeared to professional security analysts. You understood from the beginning that this negotiation was critical to the hotel's survival, Volkov continued. You knew about the translation challenges we might face, and you made a conscious decision to put yourself in a position where you could help, despite knowing it would expose you to exactly the kind of abuse you received from your operations manager. The room fell into stunned silence as everyone processed what Volkov was suggesting. Jasmine hadn't just happened to be in the right place at the right time. She had been strategically positioning herself to assist with a crisis she saw coming. That level of strategic thinking, combined with your obvious qualifications and your willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for the greater good, told me everything I needed to know about your character and potential value to my organization. James Patterson leaned forward, his expression now showing genuine curiosity rather than just professional interest. Are you saying that Miss Williams anticipated this entire situation? I'm saying that Miss Williams demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and cultural intelligence that international businesses desperately need, Volkov replied. She saw a problem developing, positioned herself to be part of the solution, and then executed flawlessly when the opportunity arose. Jasmine felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something approaching pride. She hadn't thought of her actions in such strategic terms, but she couldn't deny that she had been paying attention to the Russian delegation's visit with more than casual interest. There's more, Volkov continued, and his tone suggested that the biggest revelations were still coming. Miss Williams, my offer of employment wasn't just based on your performance today. I've been researching your background since our conversation began. He picked up his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a detailed dossier. Your senior thesis at Columbia was titled Cultural Bridges in Energy Diplomacy: How Cross-Cultural Communication Failures Undermine International Business Partnerships. Your academic advisor was Professor Elizabeth Hartman, who is now a senior consultant for the State Department on Russian-American relations. Jasmine's eyes widened. She hadn't spoken to Professor Hartman in over 3 years, and she had no idea how Volkov had accessed her academic records so quickly. Professor Hartman, it turns out, is an old friend of mine from a joint energy conference we attended in Geneva 5 years ago. When I sent her your thesis abstract, she remembered you immediately. She said, and I quote, Jasmine Williams was the most promising student I ever taught, and I always wondered what happened to her after graduation. The revelation hit Jasmine like an emotional tsunami. Professor Hartman had been her mentor, her inspiration, and the person who had encouraged her to pursue international relations in the first place. The idea that her former professor remembered her, let alone spoke highly of her work, brought tears to her eyes. Professor Hartman is now consulting for my company on American market entry strategies, Volkov continued. When I told her about today's events, she immediately volunteered to work with you directly on developing our cross-cultural business protocols. Richard Blackwood, who had been listening to this conversation with growing horror, finally found his voice. Mr. Volkov, if there have been management issues at the Emerald Crown, I assure you they will be addressed immediately. Miss Williams is a valued employee, and any misunderstandings about her qualifications. Mr. Blackwood Volkov interrupted his voice, carrying the kind of authority that silenced entire boardrooms. There have been no misunderstandings. There has been systematic workplace discrimination, and it has been documented by multiple security cameras over a period of months. The hotel manager's face cycled through several shades of pale as he realized the legal and professional implications of what was being discussed. However, Volkov continued, I'm not interested in destroying your hotel or anyone's career. I'm interested in justice, accountability, and making sure that talented people like Miss Williams are never again forced to hide their abilities because of other people's prejudices. He turned back to Jasmine, and his expression softened slightly. Miss Williams, my offer stands, but now it comes with additional context. You wouldn't just be joining Volkov Industries as an employee, you'd be joining as a partner in transforming how international businesses approach cross-cultural collaboration. Professor Hartman and I believe you could revolutionize the field. The offer was so far beyond anything Jasmine had ever imagined that she struggled to process it. Partnership, collaboration with her former mentor, the chance to influence international business practices on a global scale. But before you answer, Volkov said, raising a hand to forestall her response, there's one more person who needs to be part of this conversation. He nodded to his assistant, who immediately made a phone call. Within seconds, there was a knock at the suite door. When the door opened, Victoria Sterling walked in her face, a mask of professional composure that barely concealed what appeared to be either panic or fury. She had clearly been summoned rather than invited, and her body language suggested she knew she was walking into some form of professional execution. Miss Sterling, Volkov said, his voice carrying the cold formality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Please join us. We have some important matters to discuss. As Victoria took a seat at the table, her eyes carefully avoiding Jasmine's gaze, everyone in the room understood that the final act of this extraordinary drama was about to begin. The woman who had spent years wielding power through prejudice and humiliation was about to face the consequences of her actions in front of the very people whose respect she had always craved. And Jasmine Williams, who had entered this room as invisible hotel staff, was about to witness the complete inversion of every power dynamic that had defined her professional life. Victoria Sterling sat rigidly in her chair, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The operations manager, who had commanded absolute authority just hours earlier, now looked small and vulnerable in the presence of people whose power dwarfed anything she had ever wielded. Dmitry Volkov studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the measured cadence of someone delivering a carefully considered judgment. Miss Sterling, I want to share with you some observations my security team has made about your management style over the past 6 months. Victoria's carefully constructed composure began to crack around the edges. Mr. Volkov, if there have been any misunderstandings about hotel policies. There have been no misunderstandings. Volkov interrupted, his tone cutting through her attempted deflection like a blade. There have been deliberate patterns of discriminatory behavior that my team has documented extensively. He nodded to his assistant, who produced a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be a comprehensive report. March 15th. You publicly berated Miss Williams for moving too slowly while she was cleaning a conference room, despite the fact that she had completed her assigned tasks ahead of schedule. April 22nd. You deliberately assigned her to clean the same bathroom facilities 3 times in one day after a minor complaint from a guest, a punishment that was not applied to other staff members who received similar complaints. With each dated entry, Victoria's face grew paler. The meticulous documentation was transforming isolated incidents of poor management into evidence of systematic harassment. May 7th, you instructed other staff members not to socialize with Miss Williams during break periods, claiming it was unprofessional, despite the fact that no such restrictions were placed on other employees. June 3rd, you reduced her lunch break from 1 hour to 30 minutes as punishment for allegedly talking back, though security footage shows she spoke respectfully and only asked for clarification about conflicting instructions. Jasmine listened to the recitation of her own humiliations with a mixture of vindication and sadness. She had endured each of these incidents in isolation, believing them to be the unfortunate reality of her position. Hearing them cataloged as evidence of deliberate cruelty gave them a different weight entirely. James Patterson and his Carlisle Group colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were witnessing something far beyond a business negotiation. This was a moral reckoning that none of them had expected to encounter. But today's behavior— Volkov continued, his voice taking on a tone of barely controlled anger, represented an escalation that crossed every line of professional decency. You publicly humiliated a qualified professional based solely on racist assumptions about her intelligence and capabilities. Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Mr. Volkov, I was under tremendous stress. The translation crisis was entirely preventable. Volkov cut her off ruthlessly. For 3 years, you have had a Columbia University graduate with specialized knowledge in exactly the areas you needed today. Instead of recognizing her qualifications, you systematically suppress them because they didn't fit your narrow-minded assumptions about who deserves respect and opportunity. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Her professional mask was completely gone now, replaced by something approaching panic as she began to understand the full scope of the consequences she was facing. Richard Blackwood, who had been standing silently against the wall, finally stepped forward. As hotel manager, he knew he had to take some responsibility for what had occurred under his watch. Mr. Volkov, I take full accountability for any management failures at the Emerald Crown. If changes need to be made, changes will be made, Volkov replied, his gaze never leaving Victoria's face. But they will be changes that reflect justice, not just damage control. He leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter but somehow more menacing. Miss Sterling, I want you to understand something about power. Real power isn't about humiliating people who can't fight back. Real power is about recognizing talent wherever it exists and creating opportunities for people to excel regardless of what they look like or where they started. Victoria's breathing had become shallow and rapid. She was experiencing the complete collapse of everything she had believed about her own importance and authority. You have spent 3 years wielding petty authority over someone whose intellectual capabilities exceed your own, whose educational credentials match yours, and whose character clearly surpasses anything you've demonstrated. You have wasted extraordinary human potential because of your own insecurities and prejudices. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from the busy Manhattan street below seemed muted by the weight of moral judgment being delivered in that presidential suite. Therefore, Volkov continued, I am making my position clear to Mr. Blackwood and to the ownership of this hotel. I will not conduct business with any establishment that employs Miss Sterling in any management capacity. Furthermore, I will be sharing my security team's documentation with other international business leaders who frequent Manhattan hotels. The threat was clear and devastating. Victoria Sterling's reputation in the hospitality industry was being destroyed in real time, and everyone in the room understood that her career was effectively over. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. Tears began streaming down her face as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I have a mortgage responsibilities. I never meant for things to go this far. You never meant to get caught, Jasmine said quietly, speaking for the first time since Victoria had entered the room. But you meant every word you said, every humiliation you inflicted, every assumption you made about my worth as a human being. The words were delivered without malice, but they carried the weight of 3 years of accumulated pain and dignity maintained under impossible circumstances. Miss Williams is correct, Volkov said. Your apologies now are motivated by consequences, not conscience. If my security team had not documented your behavior, if this crisis had not forced the truth into the open, you would have continued your pattern of discrimination indefinitely. Richard Blackwood knew he had to make a decision that would determine the hotel's future relationship with one of the world's most influential businessmen. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice heavy with reluctant authority, "your employment with the Emerald Crown Hotel is terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Victoria looked around the room, desperately searching for any sign of sympathy or reconsideration. She found none. Even the Carlyle Group representatives, who had no direct stake in the hotel's internal politics, were looking at her with expressions of disapproval and distaste. "Miss Williams," Volkov said as Victoria was led from the room by hotel security, "I want you to understand that what just happened wasn't revenge, it was accountability. There's an important difference." Jasmine nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She had never wanted to destroy Victoria Sterling's career, but she recognized that some forms of justice required consequences that extended beyond apologies. "Now," Volkov continued, his demeanor shifting back to business mode, "let's discuss your future. Professor Hartman is flying in from Washington tomorrow to meet with both of us. Volkov Industries is prepared to offer you a position as Senior Director of Cross-Cultural Business Development with a starting salary of $300,000 annually plus equity participation in our American operations." The number was so far beyond anything Jasmine had ever imagined that she struggled to process it. $300,000 was more than 10 times what she had been earning as hotel maintenance staff. "Furthermore," Volkov added, "we will establish a scholarship fund in your name at Columbia University, specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing careers in international relations. Your story will inspire others who have been overlooked or underestimated." James Patterson, not to be outdone, leaned forward with his own proposal. "Miss Williams, the Carlyle Group would like to offer you a consulting contract that would complement your work with Volkov Industries. We believe your insights could revolutionize how American energy companies approach international partnerships." Suddenly, Jasmine found herself not just employed, but in demand. The woman who had been invisible for 3 years was now being courted by some of the most powerful business leaders in the world. 6 months later, Jasmine Williams stood in her corner office on the 40th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looking out at a view that included the Emerald Crown Hotel far below. Her transformation had been complete and extraordinary. As Senior Director of Cross-Cultural Business Development for Volkov Industries, she had already facilitated partnerships worth over $2 billion. Her consulting work with the Carlyle Group had led to breakthrough agreements in 3 countries. The scholarship fund bearing her name had already provided full rides to 12 deserving students. Her mother's cancer treatment had been successful, funded by health insurance that covered experimental treatments previously beyond their reach. The small apartment they had shared was now a comfortable home, with a garden where her mother spent her days reading and recovering. Marcus Thompson had joined her team as head of security coordination, bringing his decades of experience and unshakable integrity to her rapidly growing operation. Together, they had created a business culture that valued every person's contribution, regardless of their background or position. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, had never recovered from her public humiliation. No major hotel chain would hire her after word spread about the Volkov incident. She had eventually found work as an assistant manager at a small motel chain, earning less in a year than Jasmine now made in a month. The reversal of fortune was complete and irreversible. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Jasmine's transformation wasn't the money or the prestige or even the vindication. It was the knowledge that her success had opened doors for others who had been overlooked and underestimated. Her story had become a symbol of hope for people who cleaned buildings while holding advanced degrees, who served coffee while speaking multiple languages, who remained invisible while possessing extraordinary talents. At industry conferences, Jasmine was frequently asked about the lessons of her experience. Her answer was always the same. True success isn't about proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. True success is building something so meaningful that their recognition becomes irrelevant. The Emerald Crown Hotel still operated in Manhattan under new management that had implemented comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs. They had even offered Jasmine a consulting contract to help train their staff in cultural sensitivity and talent recognition. She had accepted not out of any desire for revenge, but from a genuine commitment to ensuring that no one else would endure what she had experienced. On quiet evenings, when Jasmine reviewed the contracts and partnerships that had emerged from that transformative day, she sometimes thought about the cruel irony of her journey. Victoria Sterling had tried to humiliate her into invisibility and had instead created the exact circumstances that forced her talents into the light. The woman who had meant to destroy her had inadvertently become the architect of her greatest success. It was Jasmine often reflected the sweetest possible revenge, not because it had destroyed an enemy, but because it had built something beautiful from the ashes of injustice. And that beauty would continue growing long after the pain of those 3 years had faded into memory. In the end, the most powerful lesson wasn't about the triumph of good over evil, but about the unstoppable force of human potential when it finally finds the recognition and opportunity it deserves. Some stories end with punishment for the guilty. The best stories end with transformation for everyone, and the knowledge that one person's courage to stand up can change not just their own life, but the lives of countless others who are still waiting for their moment to be seen. The story of Jasmine Williams became a powerful reminder that dignity and talent can never be permanently suppressed, no matter how hard others try to make us invisible. Her journey taught us that sometimes the most challenging moments in our lives are actually preparing us for our greatest breakthroughs. Jasmine showed us that true strength doesn't come from seeking revenge against those who hurt us, but from building something so beautiful and meaningful that their recognition becomes irrelevant. Her transformation from invisible hotel staff to international business leader proves that our worth is never determined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves and what we choose to do with our gifts. The most profound power any person can possess is the quiet confidence to remain true to their values, even when the world seems determined to break their spirit. What strikes me most about Jasmine's story is how she turned years of humiliation into wisdom, years of invisibility into preparation, and years of being underestimated into unstoppable strength. She didn't just change her own life, she opened doors for countless others who had been overlooked and forgotten. And what about you? Have you ever felt invisible in your workplace or school? Have you ever been judged by your appearance rather than your abilities? Have you ever wondered if your talents would ever be recognized? Jasmine's story reminds us that our current circumstances don't define our future possibilities. If this story touched your heart and gave you hope, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Your simple act of sharing could be the encouragement that changes someone's life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we believe every person has a story worth telling, and every dream deserves a chance to come true. Thank you for being part of our community, where we celebrate the quiet heroes, the overlooked talents, and the unbreakable spirits that make our world more beautiful. Together, we can ensure that no one has to remain invisible when they deserve to shine.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.